Hello, everyone, and we welcome you, dear friends and family and colleagues, to this virtual dialogue on commemorating the Human Rights Day. The Human Rights Day is observed every year on 10th December, the day the United Nations General Assembly adopted in 1948 as a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This virtual event is organized by the South Sudan Women's Empowerment Network, and I am honored to accompany you through this event. My name is Lilian Rizik. Today, in our event, we are going to hear a history of women political participation in South Sudan from Dr. Jen. She is a clinical professor from Fordham University in New York. And we will also hear from an expert in conflict resolution, Dr. Jackie Wilson, who is an expert on conflict resolution, as I said earlier. We will engage in a panel discussion with two individuals who have a first-hand experience in engaging in peace negotiation in South Sudan, and that is Dr. Edmond Yakani, the Executive Director of Community for Progress, and Ms. Sarah Nyanas. She is also the Executive Director of Gender Empowerment for South Sudan organization. And she is also a member of the CITISAM a verification mechanism. The two of them are signatories to the peace agreement signed in 2018, and they will share with us their experience and what influence they had on the process and what is the outcome, whether this influence they have realized it or not. So, but without further ado, I would like to welcome Jihan Deng. She is the board member of the South Sudan Women's Empowerment Network to give us the opening remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our viewers. We want to welcome you into this special day, and a special welcome to our panelists. It's great to have all of you here. South Sudan Women Empowerment Network is an organization that was established 2005 with the interest of empowering women. And there's no better day than today for us to come together and look into women's engagement in the Republic of South Sudan. South Sudanese women engaged since the referendum, actually. They gathered, they organized, and they voted nationally and internationally. And they continued, and in fact, women have always been there right before, during the struggle. We have women in the movement. We have women in the parliament now after independence. We have women in the executive decision making. And today, human rights event is nothing less than acknowledging the rights of a citizen at large of a country. And once we raised our flag, 2011, then we all became rightfully citizen of the Republic of South Sudan. And then our segments of women, today we said, you don't call women, or don't call them women, because before being a woman, we are citizen of the Republic of South Sudan. And so the rights that the United Nations is celebrating today to acknowledge the citizenry of nations, we want to be able to highlight that and look into where we are. We have done so much, and then we acknowledge also that the Constitution of the Republic of South Sudan has given the women the right through the liberation time, and even right after the independence. Now we have the transitional constitutions, clearly explains and clearly identify the percentage of women in decision making in all levels of governance. And that is something to be acknowledged. But then also, we know that South Sudan has gone through so much traumatizing conflict within itself right after independence. And that also has kind of like made a shift to where we are. And we've gone through several peace agreements after independence. Again, series of peace agreement. And peace is important for us. Peace is very, very crucial for us in order for us to develop the nation and in order for us to secure our citizenry and the rights of the women in the Republic of South Sudan. And so then we engaged in the peace processes. We also endeavored and participated in making sure that we can agree together in whatever points of conflict we had. And today we have all the panelists will be able to highlight where we were in the process. We want to focus on the process of the peace agreement and how is it going? And have we really accomplished much of it? Because 2013, 2015, there was the first peace agreement. The first peace agreement 2015, and then again 2018 we had to revitalize the very same peace agreement, and we've stood alongside our citizens, our leaders of the country, acknowledging that we must make sure we secure peace. Today we want to welcome all the panelists to highlight, and to also for the viewers, you have an opportunity for you to be able to engage with us. We have an engaging sessions. Throw in your questions and we'll try and answer them, as in where we are in the peace agreement and what is needed to make sure it is implemented for the sake of our citizens and for the women's full participation. If there is any gaps, where are they and why? And how can we bring those gaps into fulfillment? So it's an engaging session. It's not as much of like, we know what we are doing, but we want to bring in our experience from different perspectives and from experienced experts among us here and those who were actually signatories to the revitalized peace agreement, where we are as a country, where we are as the women, because women are the backbone of the nation. يعني بالعربي بقول لك الأم هي سند الأمم. You know, so when you have a woman engaged, you have more resilience and you have more results out there. So let's see what results we have accomplished and where we are going. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, Jihan. That was really very insightful. Without further ado, we move to Dr. Jane Kani Edwards. She was born in South Sudan and she was educated in Sudan, Egypt, Canada. So Dr. Edwards received her PhD in sociology in education from the University of Toronto in 2004. Currently, she is Associate Clinical Professor and Director of African Immigration Research Department of African and African American Studies in Fordham University in New York. She teaches courses on women in Africa, African history, women power and leadership in Africa, and Africa immigration to the United States. Dr. Edward, she's an author of a book called Sudanese Women Refugees, Transformations and Future Imaginings. That was published in 2007. And she also authored several book chapters, journals, and opinion articles. Dr. Edward, you're highly welcome.
Thank you, Lillian, for inviting me actually to this event. And I also want to thank SWAN, that is South Sudanese Women Empowerment Network, for putting this event together. I'm honored to be here. Could you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. You have to allow me to, you have to let me to be able to share. So you can go to, like there's a sign, you have to go where the share screen is, and then you click on multiple participants so that I'll be able to share. Okay. Okay. So I just want to once again thank Lillian for inviting me. I actually joined in at 7:30, and then I thought it was the event started at 8, but I reached out to Lillian, and then she sent me the correct time. So my presentation actually is going to focus on the history of women uh, political participation in South Sudan.
Can you enlarge it, Dr. Jane? Can you make the view larger?
And I'm going to go to
Yeah, full screen.
Yeah, that one.
that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my presentation actually is about um, the history of women's political participation in South Sudan. And I just want to dedicate this presentation to my dear mom, Martha Jabe Paulo, who passed on on Tuesday. And I just want to say this so that in her memory, because she was a very hard working person who actually took care of so many people in this world. Um, the presentation actually is based on my article I published in 2019 on the Hawa, that's Journal of Women of Middle East and the Islamic World, volume 17, issue 1. And the article actually is titled Reconfiguring the South Sudanese Women's Movement. And you can access the article online as well via the journal. So I just want to emphasize the fact that the history of women's political participation in Sudan is not a recent phenomenon. It did not start with the SPLM, for example, or it did not start with uh, the signing of the peace agreement, the CPA, or after the independence of South Sudan. But it dates back to the period when South Sudan was a region within Sudan. So I'll be focusing on the historical development of women's engagement in the political process in the country by outlining the factors that facilitated this process of women's engagement in politics. So my main argument is that there are so many factors, actually, an interplay of several factors that allowed women in South Sudan to be able to participate in politics. And one of them is the conflict and post-conflict situations, the opening of political space for women in the 1970s, the South Sudan, the international women's movement and global events affecting women, and also women's education, their exile experience, and the adoption of the gender-based quota system in South Sudan. All these factors together actually help in the development of women's political leadership in South Sudan. So the presentation is organized in this way. I'm going to provide a brief introduction on the history of the struggle in South Sudan to set the context for my discussion. And then I'll elaborate briefly on the factors that enabled the emergence and development of women's leadership and political participation that I outlined earlier. And then I'll conclude with some of the lessons learned based on the history that I'll be providing. So if we take the South Sudan history of struggles, I think many of us who are Sudanese and those who focus on South Sudanese issues knows the history of struggle. Like the first struggle that many of us here actually experienced was the 17-year civil war from the 1955, even before the independence of Sudan. And that war actually continued until 1972, when the then government of Sudan and the Southern Sudan Liberation Movement, generally or commonly called in South Sudan as the Anyanya Movement, signed an agreement. to end the war. And then after a period of 10 years, war erupted again in South Sudan, and that became known as the longest war in Africa from 1983 to 2005, with the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in Naivasha, Kenya. And that actually ended that longest war that cost many lives and displaced many people. And then the other event also is the political independence from Sudan that was declared on July 9, 2011, that gave South Sudan its independence, and that's what we have today. And then barely 2 years into our independence, war also broke out on December 15, 2013, within the SPLM ruling party. And that actually created so many suffering for the people. And within this period from 2013 to today, several agreements actually were signed. And I think Jehan mentioned that the agreement on resolution of conflict in South Sudan in 2015, and also the revitalization of the same agreement in 2018 in Khartoum. But still, despite all these peace agreements, nothing is going on in South Sudan. So except for the relative peace in the period between 1972 and 1982, majority of South Sudanese never experienced genuine peace and stability in their lives. They are still continuing with the struggle and the suffering. So now I'm moving to the main points that I mentioned earlier, the factors that actually help women to be part of the political process in South Sudan. And as I mentioned earlier, that South Sudan was part of Sudan. So if we go back to the colonial period, which was the Anglo-Egyptian colonial period, because Sudan was actually colonized by two colonial powers, Egypt and also the British. So during that time, actually, the colonial government didn't take the education of South Sudanese seriously. It was only in the 1940s that the government, the colonial government, started to think about educating South Sudanese. And so, despite that interest, still, they didn't prioritize the education of women, especially the missionaries who were in charge of education in South Sudan. And even the colonial government didn't take the education of women seriously. But despite all this, they were able to open some schools in South Sudan. And some of these schools actually are, I'm just providing two examples here. The Meridi First Intermediate School for Girls in Equatoria, and Santa Teresa Elementary School for Girls in Wow. And there are so many other examples for boys. Boys schools actually were there in other areas in South Sudan, but these are just few examples for girls' education. So moving on to the period of the Addis Ababa Agreement that actually provided a relative stability for the people of South Sudan and Sudan in general. Many schools actually were open during that time. Children were able to go to school. And I think some of the schools that I provided here are the Juba Girls. I'm a graduate of Juba Girls Secondary School in Juba. And there was also Louis that was open later, and then Mbili in Western Bahar al-Ghazal secondary schools. And these schools actually attracted so many people from around South Sudan. And then also some girls later joined, like in the 80s, actually girls were allowed also to attend male-only schools. And schools like Juba Commercial and local secondary schools actually were some of the schools that allowed women also to join the boys in those schools. And also because at that time, the government of Sudan actually wanted to create this national sentiment in Sudan. So some girls actually from South Sudan actually were accepted in some of the schools in the north, and in particular Arofah Secondary School for girls. So because of these all developments during this period, actually several students went to school from elementary, intermediate, and secondary schools and the number of students actually started to increase. So if we go to look at the post-secondary education, so many women also went to school at that time, and in particular, those who returned from exile after the First War. People like Victoria Yar Alor was the first South Sudanese woman actually to enter the Khartoum University. And then other women like Mrs. Agnes Lukudu, who is still in Juba. She was my teacher when I was in high school, also studied, came from Uganda and continued with high school university education in Khartoum. Other women actually joined the University of Juba when it was open. Others went to Ahfad University for women and also the higher nursing college in Khartoum. And others also attended universities and colleges in Egypt when the Egyptian government actually gave Sudan a program for Sudanese students to study in Egypt. So the next factor that actually allowed women to be able to engage in the political process is the opening of the political space for women, particularly during the regime of Jafar Nimeri in the period between 1969 and 1985. And particular in the context of the Sudanese Socialist Union, because that was the idea of Nimeri's regime, for example. They wanted to go towards the east and socialism and all that. So they created this SSU party. And the agenda of the SSU actually was to promote and enlighten Sudanese women politically and culturally. And that actually gave women some opening to be able to be part of that process. And some women such as Susanna Aiba Hakim, the same Victoria Yar Arol and Mary Besioni, and many others actually that I don't remember their names, held key government positions during the President Nimeri's regime. So I think the political opening during that time actually allowed some South Sudanese, including Sudanese women like Fatima Ibrahim, for example, was part of this SSU development. So also other women became university instructors at the University of Juba, while others joined the labor market as nurses, teachers, and secretaries, and also television and radio broadcasters. Particularly during that time, like Mary Sirisido Iro actually was one of the pioneers of television broadcasters in Sudan at that time. So the other factor is the conflict and the emergence of and development of women's leadership in Sudan. And I'm just focusing on the period between 1983 and 2005, the SPLM, SPLA struggle during that time. And actually, it's true that conflict always creates violence. It displaces people. People always get killed, and so many other consequences that affect the society. But still, at the same time, many studies actually on women and leadership in Africa have shown that armed conflicts have tended to open political spaces for women and serve as sparks for female leadership. And I think we can see these examples from the case of Rwanda, for example, after the genocide of 1994, in the case of Liberia, for example, when the war ended, the women mobilized actually, and they're able to elect the first female president in Africa in 2005. So conflict, although it has a negative consequences, but also it opens up spaces for women to be able to participate in politics. So in the context of South Sudan, for example, when many women actually were displaced from Sudan and they went to the neighboring countries, or some of them went beyond to the West, for example, Western countries like the United States, Canada, and some of the Western European countries, women didn't give up, actually. They remained resilient and continued to explore ways of how to improve their conditions. Some of them actually pursued studies, whether in post-secondary and also postgraduate studies, and that actually increased their level of awareness. Also, some women actually form associations and other NGOs to advocate for peace and women's rights and participation in the political process. in Sudan in general, and also in South Sudan in particular. And so during that time, during the SPLM liberation struggle, for example, women started to join the struggle, whether as combatant or as non-combatant. In terms of combatant, the studies, there are no much studies about women combatants in South Sudan, but women actually participated in combat roles and also in non-combat roles, like providing help for those who were fighting the war during that time, whether in refugee camps, they tended for the wounded and also took care of orphanages and all those non-combat roles. And that was a very effective role that women actually played. And also because of the presence of women in the SPLM ranks, the National Liberation Council, which was the highest political entity of the SPLM during that time, were able to open a space for women. And they created the SPLM Women's Affairs Office. And this office, when it was formed during that time, it continued to promote the empowerment of women within the SPLM. And then after the signing of the peace agreement, that office actually was renamed the SPLM Women's League. And then if we move from this post-colonial, post and conflict and post-conflict situations, and how those influence women's participation, moving now to the international women's movement and South Sudanese women involvement in politics. And the international women's movement actually is an external influence on the South Sudanese women because many women who were in exile, for example, during that time, were exposed to so many critical information that actually helped them to think about their position and their roles in society differently. And they did that through like attending meetings or workshops that were organized for women, awareness and all that. So that actually helped many women, especially those who were living in exile, to rethink their position actually in relation to politics and other aspects related to South Sudan. So in the context of the international women's movement, I'm just going to focus on two important events that actually influenced many South Sudanese women. And these two events actually took place. One of them was in Egypt in 1994. That was the United Nations International Conference on Population and Development. And the other one was the NGO Forum on Women, a parallel meeting to the United Nations fourth Women's Conference that was held in Beijing in September also 1995. So it's like consecutive years, 1994 and then 1995. So if we take the first event, for example, the International Conference on Population and Development that was held in Cairo, many people who were in Cairo, including myself, I was in Cairo at that time studying at the American University in Cairo. At that event, actually, the Ford Foundation Regional Office for Northeast and North Africa and the Middle East funded all the women who were there, including some men who also attended the conference. So the women's participation actually in that event brought to the fore the impact of war on the civilian population and also the challenges that women faced during that time. And many women actually participated. They presented papers and they also attended other events that were happening during that time. But before that, attending that forum, women actually organized like sensitization workshop to prepare women to be able to attend those events. And many women, especially those of late Margaret Juan Lado, Zainab Yassin, who is now in Juba, and Rose Khalifa, who is with us here in the US, and many others also who were in Egypt during that time, were very instrumental in organizing workshops and mobilization to mobilize women at that time. And these are some few images that I have in my album. I have to scan them and show them. So you can see that you can recognize some people here. We have Sarah there. Sarah Cleto is there. Jago Arop actually is there. And then the other lady who was sitting next to me, I don't remember her. So these are some of the women who were in Egypt at that time. And the other women who are working like Sarah is there, myself is there, and then the other women actually are from Alexandria. They came from Alexandria actually to participate. So those are some of the examples that I just want to show. So if we move to the NGO forum in Beijing, for example, it was the conference actually was between in September 4th to 15th, 1995. So many women actually went there, and Ford Foundation also played a great role, especially for women who were in Egypt, by funding their trip to that NGO forum. So that forum actually opened a space for so many South Sudanese women who were at the event actually to map out their grievances and also to advocate for a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Sudan. And that actually happened in an international stage because these forums actually bring a lot of people from across the world. And even at that time, Hillary Clinton actually went and addressed the participants of the NGO forum during that time. So those are the two major events that I can mention about the international influence on women's participation in politics. And these are some of the images that I guess I have it with me. I like to carry my camera a long time ago, so you can see some familiar faces also in these photos. And then the last point that I just want to mention in terms of women's political participation is the adoption of the gender-based quota system and women's in South Sudan. And that actually helped in the sense that the SPLM actually recognized the participation of women in the liberation movement. So they acknowledge that at least women should be given a percentage or affirmative action for political representation in all levels of government in South Sudan. And that actually was included in the CPA and also in the constitution, the transitional constitution of South Sudan of 2011. So with the signing of the revitalized agreement in 2018, that number actually was increased from 25% to 35%. So this is also another success for women's political participation. So I'm just going to conclude with a lesson learned. And I think if we look at the history that a brief history that I provided, I learned several points. And one of the greatest lessons is the fact that the South Sudanese women of the time forged position that transcended their ethnic and also regional groupings. Like they didn't look at themselves as this and I'm this and I'm from this region, I'm from this ethnic group. They look at themselves as South Sudanese or as Sudanese women and how they should come together and address some of the problems that are facing them. The other one is the relative peace during Nimeri's regime. And that actually gave women the opportunity to address critical issues affecting women, whether those were health issues, education, issues related to clean drinking water, infrastructure like school and other entities. All this actually help in that regard. It also shows that girls and women's education is crucial, not only for women's progress, but for the advancement of the whole society. And there's a saying that when you educate a woman, you educate a nation. And that's very important. And that didn't happen. It happened, and I think my generation, for example, we need to give thanks to that period from 1972 to 1982, because we were able to go to school during that time. Another thing that I want to emphasize also is the fact that it's very important to move beyond activism and advocacy work only to engage directly in the political process. And it's very important because when you engage in the political process, then you'll be able to articulate and promote policies and programs that benefit not only a select few, but all women, regardless of their backgrounds. And I think these examples actually were done in other countries like South Africa, for example, countries like Mozambique, and other countries that went through the process of campaigning for women's issues and stability in their countries. The adoption of the 35% gender-based quota system actually to redress the societal gender inequalities represent a positive step toward ensuring women's participation in politics. but lack of political will to fully implement the 35% becomes an obstacle in achieving gender equality and sustainable development. Because if there's no will, nothing will happen. Political will to implement programs and policies that benefit all women is necessary for the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment. And if we take the example of women during the SSU, those who joined the SSU during Numeri's time, they succeeded because there was a political will. I think the Numeri's regime actually was critical because they wanted to promote women's participation in society. And that actually benefited not only the women, but also their families and the whole society. So overall, my conclusion is that a genuine and sustainable peace, political stability, and inclusion of women in all political decision-making processes are prerequisites for the achievement of women's empowerment, gender equality, and improvement of livelihoods and lives, not only for women, but for the whole society. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kani. That was really very, very interesting to learn this rich history about our country. We really, truly appreciate all the efforts that you put together to share with us the lack of political will in our country. And as we know, the women participation in the first peace agreement, which is the one that signed in 2015, was 15%. And then later on, it was in the 2018, it increased to 25%. So thank you so much for that. I truly appreciate your presentation. And with that in mind, with that rich history in mind, now we move into Dr. Wilson, Jackie Wilson, our longtime friend. And Dr. Jackie Wilson has a broad area of international military government and peace building experiences. She was a founding partner.
It's just misbehaving it when I just went in after a whole hour trying.
Okay, so she has a very good experience, and she was a founding partner of Civic Fusion International, an organization focusing on making international peace processes more inclusive in order to attain sustainable, transformative solutions. She served over a decade with the United States Institute of Peace, and we all know Dr. Jackie from USIP and her work with them. She conducted conflict resolution programs in over 25 countries around the world, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Yemen, and Colombia. Her peace-building focus has included peace processes and peace agreements and customary mechanism of mediation and conflict resolution. In 2019, she published a report on the role of religious actors in South Sudan. And she is very well known in South Sudan. Dr. Jackie has a very rich experience working internationally. And without further ado, I would like to welcome you to share with us your experiences.
Thank you so much, Lillian. It's great to be back in contact with you and to see the South Sudan Women's Empowerment Network. You know, I've been following you for so many years. So congratulations on all of your hard work and success. So to all of the organizers, my esteemed colleagues on the panel, it's so great to see so many of you. And certainly thank you to all who joined us on the Zoom and the Facebook Live. And so let's go ahead and get started. So here we are, ready to close out 2020. The 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which was intended to be the landmark resolution on women, peace, and security. Since that time, since 1325, the Security Council has adopted 12 additional resolutions on women, peace, and security. Yet a recent global study of peace processes shows two main findings. First, there's an increasing body of evidence that shows that when women are included in peace processes, more agreements are reached, they're reached faster, and they're more sustainable. But second, there remains a glaring lack of inclusion and basically what I would say is disrespect for the role women as negotiators and mediators can play in peace processes. So whatever has been accomplished over the past 20 years, we can and we must do better. So I'm really pleased to be here today to share some ideas. That said, I have the utmost respect for those who have worked for years to bring peace to South Sudan, including the current mediation process. Today, I'm sharing my ideas for a different approach to increasing inclusion and engagement of women in the South Sudan peace process. These ideas come from my almost 2 decades of work in and on Sudan and South Sudan and with many of you. From my time spent thinking and studying peace processes in the region, from training women mediators recently from across Africa for the FemWise Africa Network, and also from my work with Susan Padziba in Civic Fusion International, where we focused on changing the paradigm of international mediation. So first, let's examine the existing paradigm. Now, importantly, these are broad generalizations and don't necessarily reflect any particular process. These are observations in general about peace processes. So generally, stage 1 focuses on getting the armed actors. And so I like to use visual cues. So this would be men in uniform or in fighting gear, in getting those men to the table. This is typically justified by the organizers who say that you need the armed actors at the table in order to get a ceasefire. And so an example of this during a visit I had to the Darfur talks in Doha, there were about 100 men and I only met one woman there, known as Jaish, Mother of the Army. Although I'd met many, many Darfuri women who were working very hard on peace efforts, and some eventually did join the peace talks. But this part of the process may actually incentivize people to choose violent means to resolve what are inherently political problems. In essence, groups may take up arms to try to increase their number of troops, weapons, vehicles, to validate their legitimacy in order to claim that they deserve a seat at the negotiating table. And this also intentionally excludes or sidelines unarmed actors from the start having a seat at the table, which makes no sense to me. In stage 2, the next phase, the armed groups with a seat sign numerous ceasefire agreements that they really have very little intention of honoring. They continue fighting to create facts on the ground while other groups pop up and start fighting, literally and figuratively, to become part of the process. The focus transitions from ceasefire talks to power sharing negotiations. So visually, the garb now changes from uniforms to suits, with the mediators often struggling to figure out which groups should be invited or disinvited. These attendees lack accountability to anyone but their own political followers, and they often seem to gain power and leverage by getting smaller political groups to join their team and create larger political alliances, which are actually just weak coalitions. In stage 3, when the agreement fails to satisfy some coalition members, the coalition fragments into smaller groups that follow leaders who often persuade his followers that the broader coalition cannot be trusted or will not give their group a fair share. 2 observations here for perspective. First, the 3 primary negotiating groups from the early Darfur peace process subsequently continued to fragment. And my friend, Darfurian scholar, Dr. Adib Youssef, in his dissertation for his PhD, documented that fragmentation up to approximately 75 groups, which I think he completed his studies in 2019. So this is a real phenomenon. And then second, the mediators say that they cannot handle or manage increasing numbers of fragmented groups at the table. So they insist on creating weak coalitions, often government and opposition or similar types of arrangements that actually may increase competition for power, exacerbate existing cleavages, and perhaps more importantly, exclude key unarmed stakeholders from providing meaningful input to the process. And this is often where there may be observer status or other types of arrangements for other unarmed stakeholders. Again, these are generalizations. They may not necessarily reflect the experience of the South Sudan peace process at this stage. And I look forward to hearing from those of you that have participated in and contributed to that process to tell me that I'm wrong. I'm completely wrong. I would be pleased to hear that. But if we look at redesigning this paradigm, we can do so in a way that results not only in more women at the table, but also produces more effective outcomes. So here are the ideas. So starting with the UN guidance for effective mediation, which is a document that I've referred to. The UN produced it a number of years ago with their mediation teams and mediation support teams coming together to share their knowledge. So the first thing they suggest is preparation for the negotiation. And one of the tools they suggest is stakeholder mapping. So I love stakeholder mapping. When I think of the stakeholders in this South Sudan conflict, my mind goes back to the time in Nairobi when the Sudan peace talks had completed the Machakos protocol, but the talks had not yet moved to Naivasha. So in a small conference room, Kenyan General Sumbewa would read out reports alleging attacks against civilians. At the time, I did not have the mental image in my mind that I do now of women running, grabbing small children and the elderly, hiding in the bush or the river, eating leaves to survive. By using the term civilians, I feel like we sanitize the mental image, but civilians are certainly stakeholders in this process. And breaking that down, you can think of other stakeholder groups, victims of gender-based violence, the hundreds of thousands of families forced to leave South Sudan, now in refugee camps in neighboring countries, the mothers or in other countries in exile, as you mentioned, the mothers of child soldiers abducted by armed groups, the medical staff and nurses who treat the wounded, the nuns and teachers who work to educate the next generation of South Sudanese in the midst of displacement and violence, the journalists who have been targeted for reporting the news, the youth who produce art and music and who perform radio dramas like Sawa Shabab to counter hate speech, the long-term displaced still surviving in IDP camps. And if it's not all negative, there are also men and women who serve as local mediators across the country. There are the women's networks that exist, as you say, across ethnic and political lines. So importantly, these are civilians, these are civil society, and these are all stakeholders. So after identifying key stakeholder groups, I would design a process to find representatives of these key stakeholder groups that have legitimacy to represent that group, or what I call, it's kind of wonky, but constituencies of experience. So groups of people that have a shared experience of the conflict. In the existing paradigm, it's impossible to tell who is representing which constituency or stakeholder group. So to explain this a bit better, let's consider an individual, not any particular individual, but someone who may be a well-known and visible member of a particular ethnic group, who may be from a specific geographical location that's experienced extensive violence. This person may also be a member of a political party. They might be a member of an armed group. They may also be a former detainee, or they may have been displaced from their home. If that person has a seat at the negotiating table, the important question is, who do they represent? Which of those constituencies, or which of those hats, or which of those, which garb are they wearing when they're seated at the table? In the paradigm shift that I'm proposing, every person at the table should be a legitimate representative of a particular stakeholder group. They should be selected by the group, not self-appointed or selected by the mediators. So how exactly would one identify legitimate representatives after we've identified the key stakeholder groups? To prepare for a small workshop in South Sudanese diaspora in early 2014 to address hate speech that was really flaring at the time, I could only select a very small number of people. So first, I outlined criteria to ensure as much diversity as possible for gender, age, ethnicity, political affiliation, geographical background, experiences, etc. Then I started asking people this question. If you can't be in the room, who do you trust to speak on your behalf and represent your views? I was so surprised by the people who were named. They were unexpected people I'd never heard of. These people were not largely political actors. Many would not be considered elites, but they were people that were trusted by others to speak on their behalf. They were people who had influence for whatever reason. They also crossed ethnic and political boundaries. And so some of them were recommended as a spokesperson by someone in this particular ethnic group, and then also another group, or from a particular geographical location and another location. So they crossed ethnic and political boundaries. I've since written about a concept that I thought about after that experience, and I called the concept twisted legitimacy, whereby people claim legitimacy they don't actually have. During my research of religious actors in South Sudan, for example, I found that yes, there were legitimate religious leaders that were in very senior positions, but I also found, for example, our research showed that religious women have tremendous legitimacy and influence, particularly at the local level. But oftentimes they're not elevated to the place where that legitimacy and influence can be utilized in a larger venue. So these concepts, legitimacy, influence, and accountability, come together in this new paradigm when negotiators are at the table are legitimate representatives of key stakeholder groups. And those negotiators are accountable to those groups that selected them to represent their views. This new paradigm provides many benefits. These representatives negotiate for the interests of those stakeholders, not for their own personal or political interests. Being legitimate representatives of a key stakeholder group gives these negotiators more gravitas and power because they now have the weight of their group behind them. It also builds buy-in for the eventual agreement because these negotiators are responsible for conducting stakeholder engagement. So they go into the process, they discuss, they represent their interests, and then they come out with something that may be a compromise, and they bring it back to their group and they explain why they didn't get everything that they wanted, but they still need to stick to the process because they're moving things forward. So let's think back to our key stakeholder groups. Many of these groups would select women to represent them. And the title of the talk that I proposed is Don't Call Them Women, because we've seen that over the past 20 years, despite 1325 and 12 other resolutions by the Security Council, the representation of women in these processes is still around 6%, which is completely inadequate. So let's not call them women, call them legitimate representatives of the stakeholder group that they were selected to represent. And I think it changes the whole perspective. Now, certainly they are women. And as I said, many of these stakeholder groups would select women negotiators to represent their experience. These women, in fact, all negotiators should be trained. And in addition, I know I did training. Training is not enough. They need to continue to be coached throughout the process. But let me be clear, there is no shortage now or ever of competent South Sudanese women who are ready to serve as representatives of these constituencies of experience and stakeholder groups. And they will play a constructive role in bringing peace to South Sudan. And as was pointed out earlier, there are also many men who are ready to support them. So as you can see, I'm suggesting using a process design that builds power from the outside in as opposed to the inside out. It thinks of power in a very different way. It relies on data, stakeholder mapping, analysis, mechanisms to identify who are the legitimate actors. And it creates accountability mechanisms for those negotiators so that they're accountable back to the people that sent them there to represent them. And then those consultations also build power for a broader spectrum of stakeholders, you know, to buy into the process, to understand what's happening. It can minimize fragmentation because you no longer have these weak coalitions that can't sustain the pressure of an agreement that doesn't meet their needs. So at the end of the day, I think this paradigm shift can ensure a much broader representation of women's experiences in South Sudan and bring more women's voices to the table. So, so I'll stop my remarks there, and I look forward to questions and answers and the presentations of the other guests. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was really, really very interesting. So don't call them women, call them legitimate stakeholders or actors, right? And just listening to you, it makes us think about the current peace negotiation or peace talk that is going in Rome between the government and the opposition alliance, the group that did not sign the 2018 peace agreement. And you look at them, they're all men. The first time they went there, and they posed a picture. You look at the picture, they're all men from the government and from the opposition. So when people raise the concern, the next time they brought one woman. And recently, just 3 days ago, they had the same talk, and I look at the room, somebody was filming and I was looking at the room. They brought few more women, but mainly sitting at the back. So it's like a cosmetic presentation. So to show the world, if you want women, they're here, but they were not sitting up front in a table where these things are being discussed. So we will keep an eye on that. But listening to you, and you mentioned something very important. You said, if you are not in the room, who do you trust that will be there to represent you? And we have two people that we trusted to represent us when they went into the 2018 agreement, and that is Mr. Edmond Yakani and Sarah. And I'm gonna hand it over to Jihan to find out. They were in the room, they secured the 35%, but then what happened? Why we don't see the 35% right now? So Jihan, over to you.
Very, very enriching. Thank you so much, Dr. Jane and Dr. Jackie. That was excellent. And please accept our sincere condolences, Dr. Jane, on the miss of your mother. May her soul rest in peace. And may the grace of God comfort you and the family. The presentation was excellent. The same thing with Dr. Jackie. I believe I wish I could have more time to just kind of like, you know, that just this, the audience, wherever you are, this is a very informative sessions that we want to engage. And we have good panelists in the sense they are well equipped with information. And for our South Sudanese, the stakeholders, as Dr. Jackie mentioned, are here with us. And we thank you so much. Our brother Edmond Yakani is an executive director of a community empowerment organizations. He's a renowned human rights activist and defender in conflict resolutions and situation. He's also known in facing government of a human rights violation. It's kind of like a whistleblower in a way. He is Edmond Yakani is a recipient of Civil Rights Defender Awards for the year 2017. He is a recipient of UNESCO South Sudan. Excuse me. He is a recipient of UNESCO South Sudan Award National Defender. And he has also expressed freedom. He also received an award in expression of freedom in media 2014. Yakani recently named by France paper Le Monde as one of the persons in Africa who actually demanded state transparency. And so he has a very rich resume here and a very rich engagement, and he stood so strong in calling for transparency during the pandemic, COVID-19, which has kind of like took over 2020. Mr. Yakani also is nominated for Anti-Corruption Excellent Award 2020. And he is a holder of a degree, a law degree in political science. So we appreciate you so much, Yakani, for being with us today. And the few questions that I wanted to ask you, alongside with our sister Sarah, who I will also bring her up to the forum in a few minutes. While we're doing this panel discussions, I want the audience to be aware we have a polling ability where you can come in and just kind of put your vote in while we're doing the discussions and asking those questions. So I also wanted to, before I go to, perhaps I will also introduce my sister, Sarah Nyanath. Sarah Nyanath, it's a pleasure to have you around. She's a strong activist that has also stood her ground for many, many years. She is a founder and executive director for Gender Empowerment for South Sudan organization, GISO, and she represents the civil society organizations within the ceasefire and transitional security arrangement monitoring and verification mechanism known as CITISAM. She's a peace mechanism. She is, actually, Sarah is a delegate representing a high-level revitalization forum and a mediator within the IGAD mediation on South Sudan conflict. She served as a Secretary General for the Nuer Council of Elders from 2014 to early 2016. In 2012, Sarah contested gubernatorial elections independence candidate for Upper Nile State. So our sister Sarah has an extensive resume engagement, and she has a longer resume than this. And just because of time, we just took segments of it, but she has footprints and she has really engaged. She's one of the people that Dr. Jackie has mentioned, people who engage and represented the women's group on the front lines in the different peace negotiation and even among the elders. And right now also she continued to persevere to empower women, not just advocate. She went further to the next level, I believe Dr. Jan Kani mentioned earlier, in the sense of moving from just activism to being engaged in politics. And so that's why she contested as an independent for the office of the governor for Upper Nile State. So moving on, let's see what questions we have here. And after hearing the data from Dr. Jane and also different approaches by Dr. Jackie Wilson, I have these questions and you two can come back to me on it. What does inclusive peace processes mean to you, given the fact that you were there 2015 and 2018? So let's start with you, Edmond Yakani. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I've unmuted myself. I hope I'm very clear.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I'd like to extend my appreciation to South Sudan Women Empowerment Network. Thank you guys for bringing this. But also I'd like to take this opportunity to say this is my 10th event where I'm the only male on issues of women political participation. So I hope one day to end up as an ambassador for legitimate. Let me start using that word because that's my praise. What do you call legitimate representative of stakeholders? This word women, it feminizes every political decision. So I like that from Jackie when she was raising it up. And also thanks to Dr. Jane. Dr. Jane, we have other engagement too. So I'd like to appreciate them, just take some few minutes to say thank you all of you for your presentation. One, what the first question is referring to, maybe before I could go, I have two colleagues with me here. I have Linda, who is managing a women organization in WOW, and I have a female ambassador for UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security. I'm speaking from WOW, so I'm really in the field. So please, guys, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. So to start with, I would like to start by really raising two trends that have come to, before I could answer your question, which I think I don't want to forget about them. I want to bring it very clear. With regard to peace process or transformation of a situation from violence to peace, and talking about legitimate representative of stakeholders, there's normally two trends that actually I'm writing a paper on it, and hope to share this paper with so many people. I wish to see input from Jane and then Jackie on that. One, when you are at stage of negotiating an agreement, the process is inclusive. And the process is open to the level that all voices of legitimate representatives are given chance. Like what we have raised, women's voice can be given chance, and we have so many of them who signs. That's the first stage. Second stage is the implementation of the agreement that is reached, which the dynamics changes. And I want to make this very clear in this particular session that we should think about that, because during negotiation or the mediation process is an open, there are no political players that have an absolute responsibility to decide on how the space of the negotiation and the mediation will be, because everybody's voice matters in that particular time. But once an agreement is signed, an appendix into a document, its implementation at different players surface. And these players are what is called political parties. And that changed the dimension about implementation and representation of women, or what you call legitimate representative stakeholders. I think for me, these two equations, don't take it serious. I'm writing a paper on it, so that when we need to strategize, how do we balance the two trends? The trend of where we're on the table, we're in the room, we're negotiating, we're demanding. I'm one of the person who in Addis was calling for 50-50 before 35, but 50-50 we're using as a strategy to end up by the low percentage of 35. But now we have secured 35% into agreement as a concept of inclusive process. But when it comes to the implementation, where are those women who play a big role in the negotiation, in the mediation in the room? How influential are they in translating that particular provision into the seats, into allocation of positions? So now the women that take role have to play a role here. It's what we call the women in the political parties. And specifically, this starts about what they call it women wing or women leads. To what level of influence do they have to secure the 35%? In the case of South Sudan, it's practical that all the political parties have agreed that women must have 35% participation. But unfortunately, when it comes to time of implementation, the women in the political parties are weak in comparison to the strengths of women during the negotiation. And they give in for men to dominate that. And that's very clear in the appointments. So this brings me to answer your question. Inclusive process, for me, it means genuine, meaningful representation of legitimate representatives of the society. What does that mean? If we agree on affirmative action, there should be no any excuse for us to create an excuse that the legitimate representatives of the stakeholders does not meet certain criteria. Because the question is, when we're negotiating for that affirmative action, there was no criteria that were agreed upon as a standards that qualify a legitimate representatives to take a position. So when you come to the implementation stage, new criteria is coming forward. New standards have been raised by the political parties. And most of the political parties in the context of South Sudan are male-headed political parties that appendix the agreement. And even I'll give an example. Look at SOA, where it is headed by Josephine Lagu. She's a powerful. Look at her level of influence in that majority men voices, why she sit alone, like what Lily was using. When you see Soma bringing women, is even if they hold position, what level of influence do they have to meet this concept of inclusive process? So for me, to really draw attention to this discussion, for me, as I said, inclusive process means meaningful, effective, and genuine representation of the legitimate representative of the stakeholders. That's one thing that's very important. But we need to ask ourselves, when we're negotiating, the legitimate representatives sometimes are more powerful. Compare if you see women in the civil society, they're so powerful, they're so influential. But now when it comes to the stage where an agreement is reached, we're going to the implementation, we start missing them. Simply why? Because the implementers of the peace agreement are the political parties. You start asking what level of capacity do women in the political parties have? And even if they have women in the political parties, I want to conclusion. Even if you have women in the even if you have women in the political parties. In terms of trust, what ideology, what philosophy do they have towards the implementation of 35%? Because some of them actually take position and start preventing the call for effective commitment of the party. You start asking, for example, look at the SPLM, look at Nunukumba, look at Out. Are they not able to push the leadership of the SPLM?
I'm sorry, I'm going to, we need to be able to give time to answer some of the questions that are being posted out there. But then also, I know you are rich with information, and we do really applaud you standing with the women's participation and their role. But there is a question, you already answered the questions that I was going to bring up. How do you prepare for peace processes to address the question of inclusion? And you touched on inclusions, but I'll get back to you. I want to bring my sister here, Honorable Sarah, if you can unmute yourself, right? I'll just kind of switch between two of you, just to be able to have more comprehensive outlook for you two as stakeholders to the peace agreement, both the original agreement on conflict resolution and the revitalized agreement. So Sister Sarah, you were there, you participated on different levels from within the elders of the community and also in the national peace agreement. So what does inclusive peace agreement means to you from your perspective? You can unmute yourself.
Thank you, John. And I will just let you know in advance that I'm in a public place where I came to look for internet. So if you hear some background noise, you will just understand that. Well, thank you, John and Lillian and Jackie. All the presentation are great. Now, what does inclusivity mean? Inclusivity is all about visibility. Women has to be visible. If we say that we are talking about inclusivity and we don't see the women, then it is not enough. When leaders who are making decisions are sitting around the table and you don't see women there, are invisible, then you know that they are not included. This would be my, basically, this would be my understanding of inclusivity. And coming to the issue of how did the women get into the table during the negotiation. By the way, when we started the HLRF at the initial stage, our voice was much louder and was more stronger, but eventually it began to fade away. That was not our making, but I think by design, and mostly when we reached Khartoum, our voice become lesser than not just only women, but also a civil society in general. Now, if we look at what happened in 2014, I remember, 2003, sorry. 2003, if you look at it, we had regional conferences, Upper Nile Regional Conference, the Barghazal, the Equatoria. I remember at the time we were in Panyagur, because I was part of the secretariat. That was the first time our late hero, Dr. John Garang, said women, they are the marginalized of the marginalized. And there has to be a mechanism, a modality in which they have to be compensated or the gap has to be narrowed. And 25% came at that time because I was part of the secretariat in Panyagur. And later on, it was reaffirmed in Yei, the Women Conference in Yei. And of course, this was embodied in CPA. But in reality, if we would have gone back to look at the data, and I like the way Jacqueline and also even Jacqueline mentioned it, the issue of data. You know, we are establishing a database. If you look at the 25%, we didn't even get into the half of that, not even a quarter of that. In the assembly, we fairly managed it. We actually, at the legislative level, this is the only area where we came to know it. But why did Dr. John, for example, if I take us a little bit back, why did he bring this thing? This is because we also held guns like our guys. We are not just this soft ground where you think that women are just there to be given. You know, they are just recipients who do not add value. We heard of the famous Katiba Banat. You had the famous Jesh al-Amr. Jesh al-Amr is a composition of girls and boys together. We were there. I mean, I'm part of those groups. So it didn't just come. We have got our Great Women Association, which then later on renamed as the Women General Association. So we actually travel within the revolution itself. We did not just go on silent. This is beside our women who took care of our children, who fed our forces, you know. Beside this, we were not just a weak sector. We are actually a very powerful sector. But how did we come to the table where decisions are being made, where our visibility become significant to our interests and our needs as women, as that sector? That was the only thing that was lacking. Now, when we went to HLRF, we thought that I remember with the Women Coalition, because even Women Coalition came around the HLRF time, it wasn't there before. There was Women Bloc in the 2015 signature, and for whatever reason, somehow, I'm not going to those politics. Well, everywhere there is politics. We went and planned, and this is where you will see where there is a plan, how a solution will be identified. We said, okay, guys, let's go for 60, so that when we fall, we will come with lesser. And we went in, just like Yakani said, we first claim we want 60 because the population of female is 60. Why don't we go with that formula? But eventually we ended up being agreed, let's give them 35. And it became like we are just being given. Our voice at that time, me and Sarah, I felt like our voice becomes softer. Because if you are being told, oh, you will be given, then you are just a recipient, you are not a decision maker. Are you getting me? It's not like as if you are demanding. So anyway, all in all, we got the 35%. But then during the negotiation level in Addis, reaching Khartoum, when our power sharing has to be reaffirmed so that it has become a key provision within the agreement. The unfortunate part is that our percentage didn't lack a formula, a modality, criterion. How is it going to be realized when it is being executed? And that is today we are facing it. You would see IO, you would see the TGON, you will see the OPP, the FDs, etc. The SOA, they have their percentage, the 55%, the 27, the 10, the 8. They have a formula who will come where and how. Those formula were put. But for us at that moment, we were put at the side. In Khartoum, we were put aside. And you could see how significant we were affected, the lack of our presence during negotiating the representation of, of power sharing, responsibility sharing. Yes, we had 35% in principle, but in reality, how is it going to be realized? How is it going to be utilized to the benefit of women? How women are going to be sure that their 35% is going to be reflected in the implementation period? It was lacking. And that is why today you would see each party, which is a male-led, would just like say, okay, we will not, the country is at war, maybe we don't want to have women governors. You know that we are lacking now, we are below even 25% of our representation in representation quota in the governor's positions. We only have one female governor now. And this is because we didn't put a formula, we did not put a security, something that would secure the utilization of 25%, the affirmative action that will secure it. Beside that, even the committees that are being made now, you would see some of the committees actually, a woman will just be there as a member, just in the sake for the name of being member, when actually it's not supposed to be the case.
Honorable Sarah, I know you are full of information, but I want us to just move forward and keep time as it is. I have a question here back to you, Brother Edmund. Looking from the perspective of how Sarah said it, that women went in with full force in the beginning of the negotiation, and then they kind of dwindled until they are no more visible, and also the perspective of political parties. So how does the beginning of the process looks? That's what she was explaining. But then who designed the negotiation outcomes, right? And who actually selects the actors? How does the selection of the actors takes place? And then the design of the negotiation itself, from your perspective, can you give us a review as an activist and a supporter of women participation?
Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of the design, and this is one of the beginning process that if you want to talk about meaningful women participation is very important to be considered, because IGAD, the design of the mediation process, does not have any experience with regards to women engagement or women participation in mediation in political or negotiation or mediation process. So right from day one, IGAD is lacking the concept of how do you get the voices of the women as influential processes into the peace process. So I think that the design is really following on IGAD. But we have to push IGAD to look for a special gender advisor, and we have to really push UN Women to make sure that IGAD have a gender advisor that advises the designing process. And one of the persons who was appointed was a lady from Sudan. She's a Sudanese who was appointed to IGAD as a gender advisor, and we started using her, pushing her. So when we get the gender advisor that was attached to the mediation process, we are able to organize a meeting with the IGAD Council of Ministers, which represent all the ministers of foreign affairs and head of states. And that's where a call was being made that there's a need to increase women representation, and IGAD have to endorse it and impose on the mediator. That's one thing that they're designing. It's a bit problematic. So it matters really, if we're going for mediation or political transformation, we need to start, step one is the designing process. How do we position the voice of women, and how do we secure space for the women, as Sarah have said? Because in the mediation process also, you need to have a continuous regular evaluation. Is our level of influence diminishing or is it increasing? If it's diminishing, why? In Sudan was diminishing because Sudanese have no experience of really positioning women with their concept of Islamic women to make decisions that it shapes the image of the nation. But they have the numbers, they have the images that can put behind, besides having Sudanese who are many. That's one thing that affects the design of the process. In terms of the selection, when you come to the civil society, we start selecting ourselves on our networks, on our connections. So we don't have a standard of that. For example, because I know who is Sarah, Sarah know who is Rita, we know who is who, so we build that connections. But there's no standard, there's no criteria. And that's why for me, I want to take advantage of giving recommendations forward. I think for next better process, there's a need to have a guidelines of how women will get engaged in mediation and negotiation. Is very important, the set guideline to inform the designing. When it comes to the political parties tend to take women that are members of the parties that will never stood up in the mediation and contradict the position of the party interest by making sure that as a member of the party, you demand we women have to be there. That's a bit problematic. What has helped us in during the high-level processes is that because within the facilitators, whom we call the mediators, we have a strong woman who is a former minister of Ghana, Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's called Hannah Tete, who is now the UN Special Representative to AU. So Hannah Tete started giving an attention because she been as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ghana, and she is one of the mediators for IGAD. She started giving attention to the women, and even she started shutting down men, say, please, I'm a female, keep quiet. That's not the way how politics is played. Give chance to my sister. So she started giving a space. And that's why when we're in Addis, we have another space when Hannah, as a female mediator, sit on the high table and open a space that the voice of women had. But when we went to Khartoum, there's no female mediator. Completely, the voice of the women was reduced and the space was shrinking because among the mediators all become men, that there's no woman that you can use as a connection to influence. The gender advisor coming from Sudan and being a female with Islamic laws, she's constrained in pushing the Sudanese male mediators further because of those cultural and religious aspects. That even she's a scholar, she has been across the world, but certain factors constrain her. So it's very important to see that also in the mediation team, among the facilitators, there should be women in order to create a link of the voice of women to be heard on the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is very interesting, and we have more questions that are coming from the audience. I'm wondering, Lillian, if we're able to pull in some of those questions that are coming in. But while we're thinking of that, there is this question here. we bring this negotiation and zero in into South Sudan, as Brother Edmund has already started, and reflected on how the importance of presence of a mediator from a gender perspective that identified the importance of, like women to women, you will know that it's important that I have to bring in a woman. And once a woman sees another one there, they are encouraged to come in. But then, Sarah, what is the mechanism really that failed, that the voices were so high and representation was in a good number, and then it dropped down? What pushed you to that corner, and how do we fix that? How do we ensure, or let me rephrase, do you think the reason where your participation decreased from the beginning of the peace agreement to the implementation, that right now women are not really in the full force or into the percentage that were given to them as 35%? Lillian mentioned earlier that even the recent talks that are going on in the sense of implementation, we don't see them. You mentioned visibility. And if women are not visible, whether from the perspective of a party, because they are not members of the party, or because, what is it? How do we fix this picture? How do we bring women back to the initial force of their participation? And how do we ensure, and not just their participation, how do we ensure that we are actually accomplishing some results?
Thank you, John, once again. And Edmund, thank you, because actually I was to mention the significance of Antete present at the initial stage of HLRF. When we started, our voice would have been silent from the word go, but her presence there added a lot of value to and enhance our participation. Because even as we raise our hands, normally she would give that a special consideration by encouraging us, by giving us chances. Something that later on, when she left the process for whatever reason, and mediators and facilitators remain to be only male dominant, this also impacted us from the word go, and it was significant. You can raise your hand and you will be ignored intentionally, you will not be given a chance. And of course, if you are not given a chance, whatever you have, it means your input is already been silent, and it means that your participation has been silent. This is where we face those challenges. And when we went to Khartoum, even became worse, because Khartoum, even not only the women or the civil society were only affected, but even those other political and arms groups that are considered or viewed or perceived to be small or to be insignificant, their voice also were not being given a chance that much. And that is when you heard there were falling out group from SOA being divided. Later on, there was NAS. FDs were divided into two groups, and the list go on. For us as women, how we would have made it more is that we need to be encouraged. Honestly, as South Sudanese, we are a nation that is emerging from a primitive way of handling or social relationship or politics. It has never been this modern. And so when it even comes to women, even it's worse. Economically, even worse. Sometimes we cannot transport ourselves to some venue or caucus or go and lobby because economically we are limited. It comes also to the exposure. We are not that exposed. And some of this venue, for example, like when we are in HLRF, this is when we begin to, some of us had the opportunity to meet now individual people who can now be lobbied to advocate for some of our rights. These are some of the things that were lacking previously. And I think when we do not have the platform that encourages us, then it becomes a problem. Now, when we look at the fact that the 35% is not being realized. By the way, who negotiated? The question is, who negotiated 35%? It wasn't the women in political parties. Mm-hmm. When we negotiated 35%, it was never the women in political parties. It was actually the women in civil society. This percentage was negotiated by women in civil society. And that by the fact that the negotiators of such quota, when they were being sidelined, then it means that percentage was left without any responsible person to take care of it. Because, for example, you go to women in Tigonu, which then I would will only be focusing on 55% for the Tigonu. If you go to Angelina, she will only be focusing on 27% for IU. And if you go to Josephine, she will only be focusing on their 10% of SWA. So basically, the concern of 35% was left as an orphan. Nobody was taken care of. And therefore, for example, if we were in the table, I believe even the first vice president would have been a woman. The first vice president would have been a woman. Because if we would have looked at the percentages that were being distributed, or another modality could have been fine to see whose responsibility this would have been, to ensure that the 35% is not just being agreed in the paper, but actually is going to be executed and be respected. A situation which is not the case now. So how do we go about it? I think we need to engage the special envoys again, the mediators. We need to engage them, because even the political parties now, there is so much side talk that are happening here in Juba of the political parties excluding the civil society. We are no longer in the picture. We are not anywhere close.
Okay, I appreciate your review, but I want to bring our main speakers to this particular questioners. How does, and I would love for both Dr. Jackie and Dr. Jane to correspond on this, how does the designing of the process, of the peace process looks like? Who designed the negotiators' outcome and the implementation mechanism, mediators versus the mediations, mediators versus the negotiator? And so both of you have presented very good data, and then we want you to just engage us on this process from your perspective as educators and research with data at hand. So you can go on, Dr. Jane.
It has to do with negotiations, and then I'll follow after Jackie.
Yes. I beg your pardon? Jackie?
Jackie, yeah, let Jackie.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so in this particular circumstance, as you mentioned, the high-level revitalization forum, moving from Addis to Khartoum, and all kinds of, the process has evolved. And I think to where it is now in terms of with Sant'Egidio and Rome. So in each case, the organizer or the host of the process has a considerable leverage to design the process. And of course, when it comes to the United Nations, they have, mediation support personnel. And so for a UN-led process, you would have gender advisor, you would have a peace process design person. You would have somebody doing stakeholder mapping, conflict analysis, all of these types of things as part of the preparation for a process. I don't know the extent to which IGAD, and it sounds like from Edmund that they may not necessarily have that capacity, but I know there's been a big focus on professionalizing mediation at the African Union level. And, so there is support out there, whether there's the political will to put in that level of detail, that level of effort to actually design a process. And the design should include the implementation. And that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of when you identify your stakeholder groups and the legitimate representatives, that is all about implementation, because when you bring the agreement from the process back to these constituencies, you want them to know exactly what they're getting and what they're committing to. That's the other part of the work that I've done, and I think is so important. These agreements are not agreements, they're not commitments at all. They're like a series of recommendations. This should happen. This is what should be done, not commitments that I will do X, Y, and Z by such and such period of time. It could involve adding quotas for political parties, for women in terms of the structure of political parties. So there are ways to design more comprehensive processes And, so I think it can be done, but that political will is incredibly important. And, Sarah's points about the influence of a woman mediator, I think is critical to engage early in the process. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Dr. Jane.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to what Jackie said from a different perspective, and that's preparation. I think preparation is very important, and the preparation from the side of the women themselves. Because I realize when people say, okay, there's going to be a peace agreement on this date, then people start scrambling, whether it's women activists or women in civil society. They'll start to scramble. Okay, let us think about how can we be part of that process. That's not how it works. You have to be prepared all the time. Like even at this time, and what actually Swan is doing is very good, because people have to prepare. So that next time if there's any peace agreement, people have to be prepared. And I think preparation requires people to have knowledge. And that's why I started with education. I know that our informal education is good. It helps us in how to interact with our community. But formal education in 21st century is very important to be able to actually assert your voice. So you have to have the information. You have to have data about examples of women in other African countries. You don't have to be limited only within South Sudan. South Sudan is still a new country. It doesn't have a lot of examples of women leaders. What I mentioned is only few. So we have to draw examples from other countries. Countries like Rwanda, for example, they have one of the leading countries in the representation of women in parliament, for example. We have to draw from Uganda, because in Uganda, the women actually participated in the constitutional process, writing of the Ugandan constitution. And I think Uganda has the best constitution in terms of women participation. So we have to be prepared. You have to have the knowledge. So when you go to those negotiations as a civil society or a female activist, you have to have all the material that you have to. And then people have to really pressure the negotiators. People have to put pressure on the negotiators and on the political parties who are negotiating the peace agreement, because the peace agreement is not only for politicians. This peace agreement is for everybody. The most people who are affected in South Sudan today are women. Women are struggling, so they have to be, preparation is the most important thing. Then after this peace agreement is signed, and that women are supposed to be a part of the political process, we should not just go home and stay, okay, halas, we finish our negotiation, we're going to rest and wait until they were included in the, you don't have to wait. People don't, when you wait, they don't care about you. So you have to be on their face all the time. And that's why sometimes, yes, I live in the diaspora, and I always use my writing as a way of pressuring things. But writing here in the diaspora is not going to help. And that's why I always say women who are inside South Sudan, actually, they should not just sit there and wait if there's a peace agreement or if there's an appointment for ministers or other government officials, then people start to write press releases about that. They have to be constantly, the continuous struggle, you have to be constant. Where they have to have meetings, you have to have sit-in, even in front of the parliament, in front of the ministry, so that you encourage people actually to think about these women. We have to pay attention to them. And that's my humble contribution to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. It's very key what you mentioned, preparation. And I think that's why women, it starts with excitement in the beginning, and then they try to work out. And I think we need to give a credit to IGAD. There is a default, but there is also a credit when they were able to bring groups of women. We know that at the beginning of the peace agreement, 2015, the resolution of conflict rather, women went in different groups. There were so many of them, different groups, different voices, and they were advised by IGAD to come under one block, which is the women block at that time. and they needed to strengthen themselves and continue the assignments and engagement and empowering themselves. Another default from IGAD is bringing a representative or a mediator for the women from our neighboring country, the Sudan. But it was important for us to have the role model or the mediator of peace negotiation from successful nations. So then we can bring in success. It's always important. This is very crucial for us too. This is a takeaway from here, is that to have representation from success, out of success, that's where, out of data, out of information, and you can bring it down and say, okay, this is the data we have done like this, and you could do same. And of course, implementation of peace processes, you might have the mechanisms that Jackie said earlier, but then implementation varies from one nation to the other. So how do we implement peace? If we take from South Africa, the apartheid, or different other nations, or even the genocide in Rwanda, and where we were almost getting into that verge of wiping each other's out, Rwanda would have been successful. But nevertheless, we appreciate what has taken place so far, and we want to be able to push forward to this. I want to bring questions from the audience by someone called Otwo, being together. What he says is, how can, and this is for all of you, you can bring in your answers 1 minute each. How can accountability and transparency be enhanced of legitimate presentation of stakeholders and peace process delegates? So he's asking about legitimacy and presentations. So how can we do that? How can we bring in the element of accountability? So please go ahead. Edmond, do you want to jump in? And then I'll come back up.
Yeah, I think transparency and accountability comes right from the designing stage. And I like what Dr. Jane have said, is that when it comes to managing or transitioning violence, from transitioning a situation from violence to peace, you don't need to wait. You need to be in advance in planning. And I remember one thing that we did, I'm one of the person who was called by IGAD for designing of the high-level revitalization process. We're able to assert the idea that women must have its own constituency. And we're able to make sure that you report back to the women and bring them advice. So for me, right from designing, we need to make sure that you have to call for the voices of women to be heard, and you have a system or a mechanism how women are visible, seen in regards to the mediation process. So right from step one.
Okay. Sarah, do you have remarks? Is she able to?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, when we talk about accountability, you can only account on somebody that you have got an influence on. Yeah, you can account when you are far, when you are not even there, not knowing what is there to be accounted or to hold somebody accountable. You have to be aware of what is it being implemented, so that tomorrow you can be able to say you have done it wrong or you have done it right, that you deserve to be given a credit, or you have done it wrongly, that you are here to answer for it. And that is where the issues of accountability and transparency comes in the agreement. Actually, part of the preamble of R-ARCSS, it calls for transparent and accountable process. Yeah, so that you are aware of what is being implemented, so that you are able to either reward somebody with a credit or hold somebody accountable. But at the moment, I don't know what to say. The way our peace is moving on, it is not to our expectation. It falls short of our expectation. But nevertheless, better late than never. I think we can still jump in as long as the permanent ceasefire holds. Women can step in, and we can demand to improve things and redirect the implementation of R-ARCSS, because I think there is a lot of good things for us as women constituency to benefit from it, and especially when we are actually the primary victim of the war in South Sudan, or civil war in South Sudan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dr. Jane.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to Jackie's point about legitimacy, influence, and responsibility of the negotiator. And I think that's how the new paradigm that should be used. for peace negotiations. And I think that's the only way that people will be able to enhance accountability. Because if you bring the person who is going to represent that particular community, whether that's a community of women or community of religious leaders, for example, that person is selected by the people he or she representing. So when that person come to the negotiation table, that person was not coming as an individual representing their own individual interests, but the interests of the people who selected them to come to the table. So when these people go back, I think those who selected them must also make sure that that person is still representing their interests, but not their personal interests. And by doing that, but how to do that, we have to actually have, like going back from the negotiation table to the community, for example, you have to provide them with information. What happened at the negotiation? How did they negotiate it? And if they felt like you didn't represent their interests well, they have to actually emphasize that you need to do that in the next time if there's another negotiation, so that you represent our interests clearly. And that's how I can answer this specific question. But the bottom line, in the context of South Sudan, everything boils down to political will of implementing something. And also it boils down to a genuine peace and stability in the country. Because if we don't have that, and I think my sister Sarah is very clear in that aspect, like she's now having this meeting in a public place because she has to find a place where there's a connection so that she'll be able to use this tool that we are using, you know. And there are some people who can't even afford to do that, you know, but because of her commitment, she was able to come to this public space. Maybe she's paying for that device or to connect to the internet. So that's very important. Without peace and stability, where we build the infrastructure, whether roads, whether communication technology, and schools for everybody, because we need to bring that country up so that everybody lives in at least a better living condition. Without all that, and without political will, we can continue to speak, but I don't think we're going to have anything that can actually help everybody. And that country, we just have to pray, you know. I don't know what to say.
We are hopeful. We must choose to have the positive worldview of events in order for us to advance, in order for us to continue, because there's no other option. We are already a republic, you know, and as a republic, we have responsibilities and duties. And so let's engage more, let's push more to ensure we are there, we are engaging. And Sarah has really given a very good example by you know, making sure she does her part and then call for her rights. You know, that's what she did today. She did her duty by presenting her views, and she went extra miles. We know network is very challenging in South Sudan, but so we appreciate you so much, Sarah, for that, and all of you actually from taking time from your different engagement. I want to ask, we have with us young ladies, we thank you so much for being with us. And Ebola, what are your thoughts? Can you pull up for us any of the questions from remarks that came in? I know I mentioned one, but then
from
all
right. All right. There was a question. From the chats that came in. The person was actually asking about 3 questions in one. The first question goes, we know that the women in political parties are few and weak. This is the fact. What are we doing to ensure that their capacities are enhanced? Can we answer one first and go to the next, or I can go on?
Yeah,
and read all
because
of
time, just put the 3 questions together and we want to be able to answer them. Probably they might even be answered by one question, but one answer. Go ahead.
All right. So the first one says, what are we doing to ensure that their capacities are enhanced? And the second one goes, how should we make political parties attractive to strong, influential women? And the third one goes, why are women not joining the political parties, and what should be done for us to have strong women into the political parties?
Wonderful. So, Ikana, Edmond, Ikana, unmute and answer.
One, yeah. One, for me, it's really creating a framework of holding women in the parties, even if empower women to what level, as long as there's no framework that empowers them to do influence. For me, honestly, my experience is it's really a waste of resources. I've seen so many women trained, but because there's no framework. That's why I'm someone called the way forward is, for example, with the revitalized process, I've shared with Lily, we have to mobilize women across the political parties to sign a declaration where calls for genuine enforcement of the 35%. And that signed declaration for us empower us legally, we can move like what Jackie have said, agreement, its recommendation, its promises. There's no mechanism how to take that in further. So having a declaration signed by women from the political parties that any violation of 35% give us a power to move further, it's a very better way. Because even how much you train the women, I know women who have been trained properly, trained the political parties, but still the manifesto of the party, the code of business of the party, the code of conduct of the party limit them. If they want to move immediately, they lose their membership. And also the system, how our political party registration are, deny women to take political responsibilities. I know powerful women in the political parties, but they have to adhere to the manifesto of the party, they have to adhere to the code of conduct of the party, they have to adhere to the interests of the party. And that's why I like to say, with Dr. Jane, as we talk of political will, I think we need to break down political will. It's a big terminology. We need to know the party interest and position. What is the interest in all this process? All politicians' interest is to have a power to control resources and to make sure citizens are not questioning them on their decisions and their actions. So we need to break down, we need to unpack the word political will so that we can directly communicate to politicians that this word political will have covered us so much, not holding you accountable. But the question is your interest, you need power, you need to control resources, and you need to deny us to holding you accountable. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, John. I think the attitude of women first need to change somehow, one way or the other. I think we have got really an issue with our attitude, how we look at ourselves to begin with. For example, if you find our conversation in most cases, women join the political parties. Why do we need to join? Why can women actually lead political parties? Why are they not creating political parties? This is, you know, the voice of people with confidence or what they believe in themselves. Not because when you join somebody, you can go and influence that person and ensure that your objective or your intention will be achieved as you wish. No, because you are joining somebody. For example, I think 2 weeks ago, I talked to Susan Jambo because I see her a lot in social media. And I was telling her, why are you not positioning yourself as a woman? Since she has got the will, since she showed that courage, then she needs just to position herself, not in social media like some activists. If she's a political party leader, let her go to Rome and become part of the process at Rome. So that tomorrow when they come, you know, decisions that are being made on the table in Rome, we have a female leader too, who will also address the issues of women, issues that has been left out, or narrow the gap further. If there is any other person that you know, maybe you know Lillian, maybe you know Jan, or maybe you know Jen, you know Jackie or Sarah, encourage her. Let her create. What is impossible? If we are not going through the violent mean, we are using the peaceful mean, let encourage the women that let get on board, let create more political party to create awareness, and then we play the politics in the way we wish to the way we wish to play it, you know? Not for us to go and to be dragged and be told when, who should be given when. For example, now we still have the assembly to be established. We already have a president, which is a male. We have got a vice president, which is a male, and the rest of male and male and male. Why should we even be prepared to say the speaker actually should become a woman? Why? Why do we shy away from it? The minute we shy, yeah, well, everybody want anyway to grab the chance. We don't want to see to position ourselves to grab the chance. Of course, the others will grab the chance because we are not seeing ourselves fit enough. And this is why I said we have an issue with our attitude. And this is something that we need to address and deal with it first. To believe in ourselves, to be confident, and then have a plan, just like Jack said it, that we need to have plan ahead of time. We plan, it was Jen, yeah. As Jen said it, that we need to have a plan. We need, if we are targeting for a speaker, then we should act like people who are really targeting to have the speaker, to be our constituency, that who should we promote, who should we encourage, whom should we support, whom should we lobby for. These are some of the things that we should have in place. And I think until we get ourselves into that position, in believing in ourselves, in planning right, in targeting right, in positioning ourselves right, and having plan for sustainability, not just like what we did in HLRF, and then we fall off. We sustain what we begin, like now the SWEN has started this, should sustain it. This is what I would, as Sarah, I should actually encourage my sisters and brother Edmond Yakani. Thank you.
Dr. Jackie, would you love to come in? Yes, please.
Yeah, so I just love what I'm hearing. I think it's so important. I actually had to step outside of my own comfort zone with politics. And the funny thing is, I've met amazing women all over the world, Afghanistan, Iraq, all the places that I've worked, Yemen. And you know, I would ask them, why are you not running for office? Why are you not involved in politics? And they would just kind of, some of them would just cringe and say, oh, it's so distasteful, you know? But I convinced myself at one point that I had something to offer, and I decided to run for office. So I ran for state delegate here in Virginia. And I had no clue what I was doing. And so after that, I didn't win, but so I entered a program that trains women to run for office, right? And in addition, I stepped up and I started doing things in our community. Now, our system is very different, you know, than in South Sudan in some ways, and the opportunities may not exist. And I'm fortunate that I had spare time that I could do this, but I'm a precinct captain. I've been a precinct captain for probably 5 years now. I work at the polling station every election. I'm there at 5:30 a.m. I ran for a competitive office in the political party in my county. And so I am the sergeant at arms for my political party. And in that role, I actually conducted a school board caucus. So earlier this year, we had to put together a mail-in ballot system, and we had to figure out how people were going to request their ballots, whether we were going to mail them to a different address because they'd relocated, all of these things, right? So I am learning, I am training myself to be more active in the political affairs in my area, because decisions were being made that maybe I didn't agree with or I didn't support, and I had to find my voice. And so what Sarah said about, you know, I have a t-shirt that says empowered women empower women, right? And so all of you on this, you know, Zoom, on this Facebook, and men as well, like Edmund, who are so critical to this effort. But as Sarah mentioned, I just love what you said, you know, reach out and encourage women to get involved, and at every level, from the local community, the village, to the national political party. You know, put yourself forward and have faith in yourself, because your experience is valid and nobody else has the experiences that you have. So I encourage all of you to step up and give it a try, and you know, and find your voice. Now, like I said, I know the women that I'm talking to, and Edmund, and the people in your organization and your work have a voice, but encourage others to find their voice as well. And then one more point I wanted to come back to briefly, it was about transparency and accountability. And I think in the United States, we had something called C-SPAN, which started broadcasting congressional hearings. on television about 20 years ago or something. And I think it really changed the dynamic because it brought other people into the room. And so I don't know if, the peace talks can be broadcast on Facebook Live or on the radio, right? To bring more people into that space. There tends to be caution and privacy concerns and confidentiality concerns with peace talks, but that confidentiality, that can happen in the caucuses, that can happen in the hallways. But transparency for the broader process, I think, would just help inform people of what's happening, and again, hold those negotiators accountable. And then the third quick thing, I wrote down the word leverage, right? In terms of political will, the way to create political will is to gain leverage. So you think about when you have a huge boulder that you need to move, and you get a tool, you get a long, stick to help you lift and move. And so there are ways to gain leverage, and some of the process design elements, some of the legitimacy elements, those will help gain leverage to strengthen the weaker parties and also hold the negotiators and the mediators accountable. So those were a couple of things I jotted down. I wanted to share.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very, very, very important. And congratulations for taking the courage and stepping up. What information is power. And so the question is, what do you do with information when you are empowered with it? And when you have experience, then you are also emboldened more. And so you can't just sit with resources that are used. Dr. John Garang used to say this, that the knowledge that you have gained, you cannot keep away from the people who needs it. Our people needs that knowledge, whether it's education or experience. And you have given us a very good role model, Dr. Jackie, by stepping up and taking the challenge that Sarah was already saying, that let's go out there, and instead of waiting to be given, let us grab, let's get what is yours. Fulfill your duties and get your rights. Thank you so much for that review. I have Tedisia. I believe she's also reviewing Facebook Live, and she has a question for us. Would you please bring it up? Yes, thank you.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so very much for the very insightful panelists. The question comes from Linda Peter. She's saying there's a big number of women in South Sudan, but there's poor representation, and she's wondering what needs to be done to flip this situation around. And this goes to all the panelists, so whoever would like to answer the question this week.
Yakana, what do you say?
The answer is very simple. Let women join political parties or establish political parties to take over. Right now, in the course of representation, women who are in the SPLMs or in the parties that signed the agreement stood up for your share and take it. Don't wait to be given, because few 3 women who sits close to the chairperson discourage the other women. Then those women need to be actually confront more than the men, because they deny their own fellow sisters not take seats. And this is the trend right now we have in South Sudan. So we need to confront those women who act as a roadblocks for women representation, because they believe that the only women who are in politics.
Fantastic. Do you have any other remarks? I think our speakers have given. Sarah, do you want to say something into that? Yeah.
Thank you, Jehan. I think one of the challenges that we have of women is the information, the civic knowledge on what is available for us. As I said it earlier, that even committees, leave alone the legislative, executive, and judiciary, even in some of the committees, you find that women have no knowledge of what is available. By the way, yesterday I lost my uncle on Saturday, my immediate uncle on Saturday. This is the first time I'm wearing something that is not black because of the meeting. I was in the funeral place, and then these women came, and of course the cry went, and we began to divert to now that government is going to be formed, the state government is going to be formed, and local government going to be formed. One of the lady, she's interested to get involved at the county level in her area. Actually, she's from Baliet. And she was asking me what I need to do. My first question was like, okay, if you need to get involved, what is it that you know? What do you know? She said, I heard about 35%. Okay, she just heard about 35%. There is a 35%. I said, I'm happy unless you have heard about 35%. Did you share with your constituency, for example, your fellow women? She said, by the way, I never bother. So then we have a problem, because even if I have a sweet and I need a sweet and I don't know this is sweet, I will not eat it, isn't it? So even if women have got 35% and they don't know that there is that 35% that they have, they will think that they need a favor from a fellow man, a fellow male counterpart to consider them. Some of our women now, they go humbly thinking that I need to be considered by my cousin brother or by my brother-in-law. And you know, sometimes when they are intimidated, are you married or not married? You know, this stereotype now begin to utilize the ignorance of women to prevent them accessing and utilizing the legally provided quota for them. And I think, how can we increase this? As women, constituencies and pro-women, like Yakani, I think it is a high time that we increase the dissemination of knowledge with regard to or with empathy on 35% at all level, not just on one level, at all levels, so that women now, they begin to own, yeah, they own this provision, and they take lead. They take lead, they demand it. They don't wait until they are given. Why they should be given? It is their right. They demand it. And when they, and by the way, I need to come in on the issues of I'm being interrupted. I'm in public. Sorry, I'm hearing these other people. The issue of political will. Do you think this political will come automatically? Definitely, it is not automated. It needs to be reinforced, and it will not be reinforced by none other than the citizens themselves. Remember, the leaders that are currently leading the R-ARCSS, okay, the Artigonu, are the same leaders who brought this country to this level. I don't shy away. I have to say it, and if somebody want to come and say, sorry, you have said the wrong thing, let them tell me, show me who actually brought our country to this level. It is not Saranyanas, it is not Lillian, it is not Jan, it is not Yakani. It is the same people who brought our country to this level. Do you think that they will hold themselves accountable? Do you think they will be transparent? It is you and me who will actually reinforce that demand. It is us to demand it. But we will not be able to demand it lacking our constituency behind. It has to be the masses. When we stand together with the masses, we will demand that, because we will say, we entrusted you to do this for us, you have to do it, because this is our expectation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A very important remark also from you, Sarah, in the sense of it's important to stand by each other as women. We have to change the attitude. That's very crucial. The attitude is that together we are strong. The attitude is that I empower you, you empower me, you back me up, I back you up. When we move in that understanding of togetherness, and also as citizen of the Republic of South Sudan, because citizenry is something that you should be proud of. Our identity is so important for us to educate ourselves of who we are, and then move on from there to the next level. There are different levels of engagements, whether it's political, where you can run for an office, and economic. You also mentioned that, Sarah, which is very important for us to be economically empowered. You know, here in the US, you have to have that, you know, resource already in your backing before you run for an office. It's different in developing countries. You know, people run for office to get hold of resources, but we can change the trajectory. We can change that, whereby we economically do the steps the right way, reach the grassroots, empower them with information, and then you yourself, as you are considering running for an office or leading, becoming a CEO of any company, because it works both ways. Once you are a CEO, you have got the economic empowerment, you have got the knowledge and the political will. There is no limit to what you can do, regardless of your gender. So this is very important. We have a lot of resources, a lot of information, self-confidence, clear identity of who we are. We can move forward, and you know, it's okay if you come in, you are young, and you have the political will. You are welcome to come up and encourage and bring the audience in, bring the populations in. Or even if you are you have limited education, because our country has been in conflict for so long that many of the citizens don't have that consistent education. It's all right to ask for help, to be empowered, to learn, and bring around you people who are empowered and learn it and are of knowledge. It's all right. So let's work together towards empowering each other. Yes, Dr. Jane.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by Sarah and how she can speak up in that forceful way. The other thing also that to the question that came from the Facebook is the understanding of politics within South Sudan. I think people have to reorient themselves in the context of what is politics in the context of South Sudan. People are looking at politics in a different way. So maybe people have to rethink the way in which they look at politics. You know, politics is not a male-dominated uh, uh, arena only. They have to look at and that's why knowledge is very important. If you know that there are women who are leading countries in other African countries, you will be able to say, okay, politics, actually, I can do that as a woman. And I think to the question that why women are not leading political parties, it goes back to our cultural practices also in South Sudan. Like most of our cultural practices always discourages women. Like if you look at the media and the social media, and when they comment about women leaders, for example, they don't talk about the failure of those women in terms of the programs that they pursued to implement. They don't talk about the position of women in particular issues within the country. They always resort to these personal attacks. And that actually makes it very difficult for so many women to venture into the political parties, because they felt like, okay, if I'm going to be insulted, why do I have to put myself out there to be subjected to this kind of humiliation and all that? So I think we have to change our mindset and our attitudes. And when I say our attitudes, I want actually our men and women together, their attitudes towards women who wants to lead political parties, because that's the only way that women can be happy to join the political parties. Without that change in attitudes, it's going to be hard. But still, we have to continue doing that. We have to push, because the attitudes doesn't change by themselves. Well, the political party, as Sarah said, cannot change by themselves. It needs a consistent campaign for that.
Wonderful. I can't appreciate you much. I want to bring in Lillian to her final remarks. I know we can spend the whole day, and we have a lot of resources, a lot of information. And for the audience, if there's any questions that were not answered, please, you have us on our Facebook page. Send in your questions and we'll try and share and do a follow-up to this. But then in celebrating the international human rights, this has been a very interesting and very engaging and educative sessions. So I want to bring it back on to you. Lillian Rize, would you please bring the closing remarks? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jihan, my colleague. It's been very, very fruitful discussion, and I cannot thank you enough for all of you for taking the time to be here. But before we conclude, I know there is a young lady in WOW with Idmon Yakani. She has something to tell us. So Idmon, is she available?
She's available, and just have a like 2 minutes message.
Okay.
Yeah. Give a message. Yeah, just yeah. Because of the time, and also yeah, it's getting much more darker. Yeah. So yeah,
hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be part of this great interaction and great meeting. I've been there listening, and oh wow, Edmund, this meeting is so. I don't know what to say actually, but it is so great to be part of this meeting. What I wanted to say that is the inclusion of young women in all of our activities and our actions. You've been talking of including the 35%. I'm sure the 35% you are not focusing, or you are not adding the young women portion in it. You're only focusing on the elites. So I'm here now to call for the rights or for inclusion of the young women to be part of every activities, every political, civil societies activities to the better development of South Sudan. One thing also I wanted to say, I've been saying it a lot, but let me just say it again, that young women of South Sudan, they lack the vision and they lack, they don't have actually role models to follow. We have, South Sudan is rich of young, the elites, the women who are powerful, who are rich in knowledge, but our young women, they don't know about them, and they need to be told about them, and they need to know them so that they'll be encouraged and empowered to follow their steps. Because if the young women, they don't have, like, they don't know that we have power, powerful elites in South Sudan or abroad, they will not come up and stand up for their rights. They will just be there. Most of them are getting just pregnant, being housewives in early ages. Why? Because they lack vision, because they lack guidance, because they don't have the knowledge, the sweetness of being powerful and being a woman who can speak up for herself or can speak up for other women's rights. That will be actually my focus, and the small thing that I wanted to share. I know that most of you have missed it, so I just brought it out, and I'm very pleased to know that there are women who are fighting for our rights. For now, you will be fighting for us, but we are here. Some of us, our young women, are here to come up and fight for our rights now and later on and in the future. Thank you very much for the chance.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Let's put our hand together for Ms. Georgette George. She is the ambassador of UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security. And I just wanted to tell you, it's not only young women, but also women with disabilities. And as it was mentioned before, this might be our first step towards inclusive peace processes in South Sudan. And as we have been seeing, the poll result that we just shared with you, almost 100% of you agree that inclusive peace processes will reduce violence. Inclusive peace processes will be more sustainable. So if we agree on this, so that means there's so much for us to do. I don't want to take too much of your time. You already stayed here for 2 hours, but I wanted to ask all the panelists, give me 3 words, and then we conclude. And we start with Edmond Yakani. Give me 3 words, taking the way forward.
Don't wait to be given, take it and start now. Thank you.
Sarah?
Well, my 3 words would be women leaders should start engaging IGAD once again, be part of the processes of this other mini negotiation that is happening. 2 is that we need to get out for a mass campaign to reach our women constituencies. 3rd, let the women get themselves registered as women politicians to create new political parties, because political parties laws is going to be passed by the new assembly. So let them get on board. These are the 3 things. Let's re-engage, let's get our masses informed, and let's get ourselves into political party games. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jen?
Yeah, I just have 3 points. That's for women, all women, including our young women. I have a 21-year-old daughter. So my 3 words are preparation. You always have to be prepared, and you have to participate instead of just staying at home. So preparation, participation, and resilience. Even if you face difficulties, you don't have to give up. You have to keep on moving. And those 3 words actually can help you. Preparation, participation, and resilience. And this is also important, especially for our young girls. in the sense that, yes, maybe you are going through difficulties in so many aspects, whether economical or social or so what, but if you're resilient in your position, you'll be able to achieve what you want. So
thank you so much, and our condolences to you, and we stand by you. Dr.
you.
Jackie, I know you talked about the ways to gain leverage. Give us 3 words.
All right. Well, thank you all again. This has been wonderful. I would come back to legitimacy, accountability, and leverage. Think about ways to gain leverage, to have more influence into all of these processes in political parties, governance, peace processes, etc. So, and I guess I'll add a 4th, persistence. Don't give up. Never, ever, ever give up. All right, that's it.
Don't give up, women of South Sudan. We continue to be underrepresented from the history that we heard from Dr. Jane, and the history is repeating itself as we see people are going into the Rome talk without women, and if there are women, they are only a cosmetic representations. I heard from you that don't wait to be given, stand up for your rights, go and get it. I heard a word of encouragement from young women, and we still have a lot to do. With that, I really want to thank you so much, and I just wanted to assure you this is the first step towards achieving inclusive peace processes in South Sudan. Thank you all, and I appreciate your time, and you have a wonderful day. It's raining here in Arizona. I don't know about you out there.
It's sunny here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. All the best.